Hi again then guys, and welcome to another special projects replica build, and this time we're doing a classic muscle car replica. We have done a few of these before, but not as many as some of the other styles of vehicle that we do, and this particular replica is a replica of the Pontiac Trans Am, specifically the SD455 Trans Am, which is of course not featured on the game and is significantly more powerful than the Firebird, which we do have on GT6. Now, I have made some visual changes to make it look a little bit more similar to the SD455, so we'll go over to the visual tuning garage first of all, then over to the mechanical garage next, and then of course finally take it out to a racetrack to see how it handles, how it performs, and if it's fun. Now, when it comes to bodywork, you do have some pretty extreme visual options on this car, some pretty cool ones actually, but visually I personally find it to be closer to the SD455 without any of those extreme body kits. There is no flat floor, even if there was we wouldn't need it. For the rear wing we've left that standard. As far as the other options, I have fitted one of those, which primarily changes the top of the car, and I've opted for the B section, which obviously, as you can see, fills in the roof panels to make it again look more like the 455 version. As far as the rims of the car, we've got the standard size, and I've swapped them out for these American Racing VN500 rims, which don't look exactly accurate to the real car, but at the same time don't look too far off. We haven't fitted any additional meters on this particular model. Now obviously this is a production model, so there are a wide variety of colours that you can go for. You don't have to be stuck to any particular one. I've chosen a red, of course, and the particular red that I've opted for is a pretty self-explanatory one as far as how to get it, and the particular red is called, when we finally scroll down to it, Viper Red. As I said, completely self-explanatory where you get that colour from. We have painted the rims in a version of chrome. I believe you can only get those chrome colours in seasonal events. There may be other ways that I'm not aware of, but I believe that's the main way, and we haven't painted the brakes because those are still stock. So that's overall for the visual look of the car. A relatively understated and smoothed off overall appearance. So now of course let's go over for the mechanical setup. Now, as always, of course, and any who are familiar with the series will know this, but for any who are perhaps new, I always like to make these replicas, if at all possible, rounded off to the nearest usable PP, say to the nearest 10 or even the nearest 5. In the case of this car, that is the nearest 5, as you can see, 465 PP, and that's actually fairly reasonable. It's certainly not overly high. Now, we've gone for sport soft tyres because it is, of course, more of a street car. For the brakes, we've left those stock, of course, because you really don't want a car like this to feel too much like a racing vehicle. For the suspension, we've got the ride height 10mm higher on the front, just to give it a more even ride height overall. For the springs, we've got them relatively low, but still rounded off to 425 and 350. The dampers and anti-roll on 3. Neutral camber, neutral toe. As far as the gearbox, I looked up the settings of, as with many muscle cars from back then, a couple of different gearbox options that you had, including a manual and auto, and I opted to leave it for the standard 4-speed, which is the closest to the gearbox that you want to represent in this car, of course. Unless you want the auto, then feel free to look up those settings. We've left the clutch, flywheel and prop shaft standard for the same reason, of course, as the brakes. For the diff, we've got everything as low as possible. As far as power, the actual car has 310 horsepower, so a lot more power than the Trans Am which we have on the game. So in order to get that, I've gone for an oil change, then a stage 2 engine tune, and reduced the power down to 81.5%. And then as far as the weight, the specs that I could find indicated that this car weighs 1,691 kilos, so we've added a 51 kilo ballast. And then the reason why we've put that 2% towards the front is to round off that PP, because as you can see, if you go any closer to the centre, it bumps you up to 466. So that's overall for the replica, a relatively simple one as far as these go. So now of course let's take it finally out to a track to see how it handles itself. Now, the funny thing about this particular replica is that it actually handles itself perhaps a little bit too well. Ironically, the handling is actually a little bit too good. The suspension, although soft on the settings, feels really good, and the handling overall is really enjoyable. It's not just a good handling car. There are certain cars which go beyond just being good. They're fun and engaging, and this really is. The handling's really smooth, it's very easy to drive, and it has surprisingly good handling considering how loose we were with the settings. Now, the top speed's only around 140 due to the gearbox, but this is of course primarily a tune just for enthusiasts who want to enjoy the car rather than necessarily race it. That being said, it would be pretty cool to put this up against its more equivalent models such as the Chargers, the Cudas, etc., to see how it fares in SD455 spec. So if you do decide to use this replica overall, obviously I hope you find it fun and maybe even competitive in racing if you do decide to use it for that. And if you'd like to keep up with other replicas like this, be sure to hit subscribe down below for those. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.